Welcome back to Centrelink Insider AU. This video sits at the intersection of the two things this channel covers: the Centrelink and age pension rules on one side, and investment and wealth strategy on the other. We have been building out our investment content alongside our usual Centrelink coverage because these two things are not separate for most retired Australians. They are deeply intertwined. If you are new here, subscribe right now because we are covering both sides of the retirement income equation every single week. And share this video with anyone you know who is approaching retirement and trying to figure out how to structure their finances in a way that makes sense both as an investment strategy and as a Centrelink strategy simultaneously. Now let us get straight into it. To understand why investment structure matters so much for your Centrelink eligibility, you first need to understand how the Centrelink means test actually works. And I want to go deeper into this than we usually do, because the details matter enormously when we start talking about specific investment strategies. Centrelink applies two separate tests to determine your age pension entitlement: the assets test and the income test. Centrelink calculates your pension under both tests and pays you whichever gives the lower pension. So if the assets test would reduce your pension by $400 per fortnight, but the income test would only reduce it by $100, the assets test cuts in and you receive the lower amount. This is important because it means managing just one of the two tests is not enough. A strategy that perfectly manages your assets test position may still leave you receiving a reduced pension because your income test position is too high, or vice versa. The assets test compares the total market value of your assessable assets against the thresholds that determine your pension entitlement. From 20 March 2026, a single homeowner can have up to $321,500 in assessable assets and still receive the full pension. Above that, the pension reduces by $3 per fortnight for every $1,000 of assets over the threshold. The pension stops entirely at $722,000 for a single homeowner. For a homeowner couple combined, the full pension threshold is $481,500 and the upper cutoff is $1,085,500. The market value of any asset you or your partner own is assessed by Centrelink to determine your potential eligibility for the age pension. Importantly, your residential home is not included in the age pension assets test. That home exemption is the single most powerful structural feature of the entire retirement planning system, and understanding how to use it properly is foundational to everything else we cover today. The income test examines how much income you receive or are deemed to receive from various sources every fortnight. A single person can have up to $218 per fortnight, and a couple up to $380 combined per fortnight before the pension begins to reduce. For every dollar of income above the free area, the pension reduces by 50 cents for a single and 25 cents each for a couple. For the income test, Centrelink uses a system called deeming for financial assets rather than assessing your actual investment earnings. Rather than assess your actual investment earnings, it applies assumed rates of return to your financial assets regardless of what those assets actually earn. From the 20th of March 2026, the lower deeming rate of 1.25% applies to the first $64,200 of financial assets for singles and $106,200 for couples combined. And the upper deeming rate of 3.25% applies to everything above those thresholds. This matters enormously for investment strategy because it means the income test consequence of holding financial assets is determined by the deeming rates rather than your actual returns. An investor earning 6% on their share portfolio is assessed as if they are earning 3.25% above the deeming threshold. An investor earning only 1% on a term deposit is also assessed as if they are earning 3.25%. The actual return is irrelevant to the Centrelink income test calculation. Now let me walk through the specific investment and asset structure strategies that interact most significantly with the Centrelink means test. And I want to be clear that what I am describing are all legitimate legal strategies that are widely used and openly discussed by licensed financial advisors across Australia. None of these involve hiding assets or deceiving Centrelink. They involve understanding which asset structures are assessed differently under the means test and structuring your financial position accordingly. The first strategy is maximizing investment in your principal home. Your principal residence is completely exempt from the assets test, regardless of its value. This is unambiguous under the rules. The home is also exempt from the income test, since a home does not generate deemed income. This makes your principal home the most Centrelink efficient place to hold wealth in Australia, because every dollar invested in your home is a dollar that has no impact whatsoever on your pension entitlement. Your home is fully exempt from the assets test, making renovations, upgrades, and mortgage repayments powerful strategies for managing assessable assets. Any home improvements, renovations, landscaping, and similar expenditures reduce your assessable cash or bank balance and increase your home equity, which is exempt. Paying off your mortgage increases home equity but does not increase assessable assets. For a retiree whose assessable assets sit close to or above a threshold, spending on meaningful home improvements rather than holding surplus cash in a bank account achieves the same practical result while reducing the Centrelink assessment. Let me give you a concrete example of the pension impact. If you have $50,000 in a bank account that is being assessed as a financial asset, Centrelink deems that $50,000 to be generating income at the relevant deeming rate. In your assets test, that $50,000 is also counted toward your assessable assets. If you spend $50,000 renovating your home, those funds move from your bank account into your home's equity. The renovated home is still exempt. Your bank balance is $50,000 lower, and your assets test position has improved by exactly $50,000. Paying off $50,000 of debt, depending on how that debt is structured, could increase your pension by $3,900 per year through the assets test effect alone. The key caveat here is liquidity. Money spent on your home cannot easily be accessed later. Converting a bank balance to home equity reduces your financial flexibility. This trade-off between Centrelink efficiency and financial liquidity is real and must be considered carefully in the context of your overall financial plan. The second strategy involves funeral bonds and prepaid funeral expenses. These are probably the least glamorous investment strategy in the entire financial planning toolkit, but they are also one of the most cost-effective for retirees who sit close to the assets test threshold. Funeral bonds and expenses, up to certain limits, are excluded from the assets test and from the income test entirely. The allowable limit for funeral bonds is $15,750 from 1 July 2025, reviewed on 1 July each year. Investing this amount could result in an increase in your pension of up to approximately $1,228 per year. Each member of a couple can hold an individual funeral bond up to the threshold limit, effectively doubling the exempt amount for a couple to $31,500 between them. However, if a couple invests jointly into a single funeral bond, it must not exceed the individual threshold. The joint bond does not receive a doubled exemption. It is also important to understand how the threshold works for funeral bonds because it has a specific catch. If the initial amount invested in the funeral bond was less than the threshold at the time of purchase, the entire bond is exempt from the assets test, even if it has grown above the threshold due to investment returns. If the initial amount invested exceeded the threshold at the time of purchase, the full current value of the bond is assessed. So the amount invested at purchase time matters, not the current value. Invest at or below the threshold and you are protected. There is no limit to the amount you can spend on prepaid funeral expenses. If you have arranged and fully paid for your funeral through a contract with a funeral director, that entire prepaid amount is exempt from the assets test, provided the contract states the services have been fully paid for and the payment is not refundable. For retirees with assets above the pension threshold who are comfortable with this type of planning, prepaying funeral expenses beyond the funeral bond limit provides additional assessable asset reduction without any cap other than the reasonableness of the expense amount. The third strategy involves superannuation structuring based on age. This is one of the most powerful strategies available to couples where there is an age gap between partners. and it is also one of the most commonly misunderstood. The rules around when super becomes accessible by Centrelink depend critically on whether the superholder has reached pension age. If you are under age 67, your super is invisible to Centrelink for both the assets test and the income test, provided the super remains in the accumulation phase. The moment you reach pension age, your entire super balance is counted as an accessible asset, and the balance is also deemed to earn income under the income test. This catches some couples off guard when the younger partner turns 67 and their previously uncounted super suddenly pushes the couple's combined assets above the threshold. For couples where one partner is older and has already reached pension age while the other has not yet turned 67, there is a significant planning opportunity. Superannuation in the accumulation phase held by the younger partner is exempt from the Centrelink age pension assets test. By utilizing the bring forward provisions, you can contribute up to $360,000 into your younger spouse's superannuation account. Moving $360,000 from the accessible environment into your younger spouse's exempt super account can increase your age pension by up to $14,040 per year. This strategy must be weighed carefully against what is being given up by making the contribution. By putting $360,000 into a pension account, the money is less immediately accessible, and there are important considerations around the total super balance rules and whether the younger partner is eligible to make further contributions. But the pension impact of properly structured spousal super contributions for couples with an age gap can be genuinely significant. The fourth strategy involves the interaction between debt and the assets test. This is an area where the specific structure of your borrowings can have a measurable impact on your Centrelink position. Any debts owing on accessible assets, such as investment properties or share portfolios, are subtracted from their market value for the purposes of the assets test assessment. For example, if you have an investment property valued at $600,000 and you still owe $200,000 to the bank for the loan you obtained to buy it, the value of your investment property asset will be assessed at $400,000, not $600,000. However, and this is the critical distinction, debts secured against exempt assets do not reduce your total assessable assets. A mortgage secured against your family home, regardless of what the borrowed funds were used to purchase, cannot reduce your assessable assets because the home itself is not in the assessable pool to begin with. This means that if you have a $200,000 mortgage secured against your principal home but you have used those funds to purchase accessible investment assets, the full value of those investment assets is assessed without any offset for the mortgage. By comparison, a $200,000 investment loan secured directly against the investment property does reduce the assessable value of that property by $200,000. The practical implication is that if you have both a home mortgage and investment borrowings, structuring the debt correctly so that investment loans are secured against investment assets rather than against the home can meaningfully reduce your assessable asset position. The fifth strategy relates to lifetime annuities and the Centrelink assessment of certain income stream products. This is a more sophisticated area of planning that does not suit every retiree, but that can provide meaningful benefits for those with particular circumstances. The legislation around lifetime annuities changed on 1 July 2019, and these products are now assessed differently from account-based pensions. Under the current rules, only 60% of the purchase price of a lifetime annuity is accessible for the assets test for most products meeting the relevant criteria. The remaining 40% of the purchase price is exempt. This partial assets test exemption means that converting a portion of your financial assets from an account-based pension or bank deposits into a qualifying lifetime annuity can reduce your assessable asset position while still providing you with a guaranteed income stream for life. The income test treatment of lifetime annuities also differs from deeming in a way that can be advantageous depending on the product structure and your specific circumstances. However, the trade-off with lifetime annuities is significant. These are generally irreversible products. Once you commit your capital to a lifetime annuity, you typically cannot access the underlying capital if your circumstances change. The certainty of income and the Centrelink efficiency come at the cost of flexibility. This is a strategy that requires careful modeling of your specific situation and genuinely requires professional advice before implementation. The sixth strategy is around gifting and the 5-year rule. I want to cover this one in detail because it is one of the most widely misunderstood areas in retirement planning, and it is the one that most commonly results in retirees creating Centrelink problems they did not anticipate. Centrelink allows you to gift up to $10,000 per financial year with a rolling maximum of $30,000 over any 5-year period, without the gifted assets being subject to the assets test. Gifts in excess of these amounts will be assessed, and the deeming rate will also be applied to the excess for the purposes of the income test for 5 full years after the gift was made. The gifting rules exist to stop people from giving away wealth to family members and then claiming the pension. The most frequent mistake is giving away large sums to adult children shortly before applying for the pension. People assume that once the money leaves their bank account, it leaves the assets test too. It does not. Anything above the $10,000 annual or $30,000 rolling 5-year limit remains a counted asset for 5 years, so the pension reduction stays in place long after the money is gone. This applies whether the gift was made to family members, friends, trusts, or charities, and it applies even if the recipient has already spent the money. If you are more than 5 financial years away from reaching your pension age, or from receiving any other Centrelink payments, you can gift any amount without affecting its eventual assessment once you reach pension age. This means that gifting planned well in advance, well before the 5-year window relevant to pension age, can be done without creating a Centrelink deprivation problem. Gifting done in the last 5 years before or during pension age requires careful attention to the annual and rolling limits. The 7th strategy involves understanding how different types of investments are assessed differently and positioning your portfolio accordingly. For the income test, Centrelink uses deeming for most financial assets, including bank accounts, term deposits, shares, managed funds, listed securities, and account-based pensions commenced after 1 January 2015. Deeming means your actual returns are irrelevant to the income test calculation. However, certain income stream products that fall outside the standard deeming framework can be assessed based on their actual income distribution rather than the deemed rate. Account-based pensions commenced before 1 January 2015 that meet the grandfathering criteria are assessed based on the actual drawdown amount rather than the deeming rate, for income test purposes only. The assets test still assesses the full balance of grandfathered account-based pensions. For retirees who hold these grandfathered products and whose actual drawdown is lower than what the deeming rate would assess, maintaining these products without switching to newer alternatives preserves an income test advantage. Switching to a new account-based pension product would trigger deeming on the new product and potentially increase the assessed income for the same underlying balance. The 8th strategy involves managing investment timing in relation to Centrelink assessment dates. This is a planning nuance rather than a major structural strategy, but it can make a difference for retirees whose assessable assets fluctuate significantly throughout the year. Centrelink assesses your assets at the time of your review or application, and you are required to notify Centrelink of changes within 14 days of those changes occurring. For retirees who receive lump sum payments, irregular income, or who make large purchases in specific periods, understanding how the timing of those events interacts with your Centrelink assessment can be valuable. For example, a retiree who prepays annual insurance premiums, utilities, or legitimate ongoing expenses in June reduces their bank balance and therefore their assessable financial assets at that point in time. Prepaying legitimate bills reduces assessable assets on the date Centrelink reviews your situation. This is not a complex strategy, but it reflects the broader principle that the structure and timing of your financial decisions have direct consequences for your Centrelink position. Now, let me address the investment strategies that do not help your Centrelink position, and in some cases, actively damage it, so you know what to avoid. The first common mistake is holding surplus cash in bank accounts when it could be deployed into assessable reducing uses without sacrificing genuine financial security. Bank deposits are fully assessable financial assets for both the income and assets tests. Many retirees accumulate cash reserves beyond what they genuinely need for near-term liquidity and simply leave those funds in savings accounts because that feels safe. But from a Centrelink perspective, every dollar in a bank account is a dollar directly assessed against your pension entitlement. Identifying uses for surplus cash that are either exempt from the assets test or that provide genuine value while reducing the assessable balance is an important part of integrated retirement planning. The second common mistake is making large gifts to family members without understanding the 5-year rule and without planning the timing correctly. This mistake alone costs retirees thousands of dollars per year in avoidable pension reductions. The genuine generosity of wanting to help adult children financially is entirely understandable, but doing so without understanding that Centrelink will count gifted amounts above the annual and 5-year limits as your assessable assets for 5 years, regardless of where the money actually is, means the pension cost of the gift can far exceed any tax or efficiency benefit it was intended to achieve. The third common mistake is failing to claim the investment debt offset against assessable investment assets. Retirees who have investment loans secured against investment properties or share portfolios sometimes do not realize that the outstanding balance of those loans reduces their assessable asset value. Every debt owing on an assessable asset reduces the net assessable value of that asset. If your Centrelink declaration shows a property or investment at its gross market value without subtracting the associated investment debt, your assessed assets are overstated and your pension may be lower than it should be. This is a straightforward factual error that is surprisingly common and entirely correctable. The fourth common mistake involves the transition from accumulation to pension phase super at exactly the wrong time. Many Australians convert their entire superannuation balance to an account-based pension at retirement without considering the Centrelink implications of the timing of that conversion for their couple's combined position, particularly when there is an age gap between partners. A younger partner's super in accumulation phase is invisible to Centrelink. Converting it to an account-based pension makes it fully visible. For couples where the younger partner has a substantial super balance and is approaching but has not yet reached pension age, the decision of when to convert accumulation super to a pension phase product has direct and immediate consequences for the older partner's Centrelink entitlement. This decision should never be made without understanding the full Centrelink impact. Now let me walk you through the practical framework for thinking about the intersection of investment strategy and Centrelink eligibility in a holistic way. The first principle is understanding which assets are exempt and maximizing their use within your overall financial plan. Your principal home is exempt. Super in accumulation phase for people under pension age is exempt. Funeral bonds up to the threshold are exempt. Prepaid funeral expenses without limit are exempt. Some annuity products are partially exempt. Understanding the full map of exempt assets and using them strategically is the foundation of an integrated retirement investment strategy. The second principle is not treating the two tests as separate. Every investment decision you make in retirement affects both the assets test and the income test simultaneously. A decision that reduces your assets test liability may increase your income test liability if the asset moves from a non-deemed category into a deemed one, or vice versa. Centrelink pays you based on whichever test produces the lower pension amount. Managing one test without understanding the other leaves half the picture unaddressed. The third principle is that the right strategy is individual. Two retirees with identical total wealth can end up with very different pension outcomes depending on how their assets are structured. The difference is not theoretical. None of the strategies described in this video are universally applicable. Spousal super contributions make sense for couples with an age gap but are irrelevant for single pensioners. Investment debt offsetting matters for retirees with investment properties or share portfolios, but is irrelevant for those holding only bank deposits. Home renovation makes sense for retirees with surplus liquid assets and genuine home improvement needs, but is the wrong strategy for someone who needs those funds to remain liquid for healthcare or living costs. The fourth principle is that planning before retirement is worth far more than planning after. Many of the most powerful strategies, particularly around super contributions, spousal super, gifting timing, and debt structure, are most effective when implemented in the 5 to 10 years before reaching pension age rather than at or after retirement. The decisions made in your late 50s and early 60s can have a meaningful effect on what you ultimately receive in pension payments for the rest of your retirement. Once you are already on the pension with assets settled into their current structure, the options for meaningful change narrow significantly. The fifth principle is that integrated planning requires professional advice. The interaction between investment strategy and Centrelink eligibility involves superannuation rules, tax law, social security legislation, estate planning considerations, and individual financial circumstances simultaneously. The Centrelink means test rules are detailed and change regularly. The super rules are complex and changing. The tax rules around property and investment income have just been significantly reformed through the May 2026 budget. Navigating all of these simultaneously in a way that genuinely serves your financial interests requires professional guidance, and the cost of that guidance is typically a small fraction of the pension value that a well-structured retirement plan can protect or unlock. A qualified financial advisor who specializes in retirement income planning and age pension strategy can model your situation under the current rules, project how it might evolve as you draw down in retirement, and identify whether a different structure could improve your overall position. Now, let me bring everything together with the practical actions you should take. The first action is to get a complete, accurate, and current picture of all your assessable assets and your total financial position. This is the starting point for every other decision. Know what Centrelink currently sees when they assess your pension entitlement, and compare that to what you actually hold. The second action is to identify which of your assets are currently exempt and which are assessable, and check whether any of your assessable assets could legitimately be converted to exempt uses without meaningfully compromising your financial security or liquidity. The third action is to review your Centrelink declaration through MyGov and verify that investment debts are correctly offsetting the gross value of investment assets in your declaration. If you have investment loans, make sure they are subtracting from the assessable value of the relevant investment assets in your Centrelink record. The fourth action is to review the structure of any superannuation held by you and your partner in the context of your relative ages and how close each of you is to pension age. If there is an age gap and the younger partner has super in accumulation phase, to understand how that super's eventual assessment will affect your combined pension position and whether any preemptive contribution strategy makes sense before that super becomes assessable. The fifth action is to review your gifting history over the past 5 years. If you have gifted amounts above the $10,000 annual or $30,000 5-year limits, confirm that those excess amounts are correctly recorded in your Centrelink Assets Declaration, because even if you have gifted funds and they have been spent, Centrelink will count the excess as your asset for 5 years from the date of the gift. And the sixth action is to speak with a financial advisor who specializes specifically in retirement income and age pension planning before making any major financial decisions. Not a general financial planner, but someone who understands the interaction between investment strategy and Centrelink eligibility at the level of detail that the decisions in this video require. The investment strategy that best serves your retirement is not just the one that grows your wealth most efficiently in isolation. It is the one that grows your wealth most efficiently while simultaneously preserving your access to the pension entitlements you have earned through a lifetime of contributing to Australia's tax and social security system. If this video helped you today, please give it a thumbs up, because it genuinely helps more Australians find this information when they need it most. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these strategies surprised you the most, or which one applies most directly to your situation. Subscribe to Centrelink Insider AU, because we are here every single week covering both the government entitlement side and the investment and wealth side of retirement in Australia. And share this video with anyone you know who is approaching retirement and trying to figure out how to structure their finances in a way that serves both goals simultaneously. Until next time, stay informed, stay protected, and take care of your financial future.